There was terrible vengeance of the government against people who were fighting for justice on any level. There were these huge marches. We were almost at the bridge to the palace. And it was all the sectors. It was farmers and students. But the people of faith were in the front because the hope was that they would be less violent because we were in the front. Usually, they had these big water cannons, and they would use these water cannons to disperse the march. But they weren't just pulling those out, the water cannons. They were pulling out guns. And there was a young Catholic priest who was sort of in the middle of us. He had some bread in his bag and wine. He said, "We're going to celebrate communion right here." They waited till we were finished with communion to start shooting. I didn't get hit. I was just running. There was blood. It was slippery because people were screaming and falling. I would just never forget the people's willingness to sacrifice, That young priest didn't have a gun. He wasn't doing anything threatening to the administration. He was just protesting nonviolently. It was very close to EDSA. And of course, EDSA was the most amazing thing. I do believe now, looking back, at the time we felt like EDSA was a miracle of people power, as well as a miracle of God's power. It's not separate, it's intertwined, it's all the same. So it's all the power of God, and it's all people being willing to be vehicles of that. Although I am a Lutheran pastor, I was working with the Episcopal Church of the Philippines in 1985. I was working in the hospitals as a chaplain. In the National Children's Hospital, one of my areas was the malnutrition ward. They couldn't spare nurses for that area because honestly, they weren't doing anything medical. They were just trying to save the children's lives with intravenous food. So the mothers would come, or the grandmothers or the aunties would come and take care of the children. And so I really got to know a lot of people very well. And I got to know how they ended up in that situation, that it wasn't a question of simple poverty. It was much uglier than that. Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos had no limits to their greed. They were extraordinarily wealthy, and it never stopped them from stealing their country blind. What really struck me was the impunity with which the foreign corporations and the cronies of Marcos could operate. Sometimes they would actually take land for agribusiness without compensating the people, and the courts only provided justice for the wealthy. People naturally organized around this to fight back, because if your children are dying unnecessarily and unjustly, you come together to try to make common change. We were very involved with the different Christian vehicles for being involved with the movement. For most of the time that I lived there, it was Bayan Co. It was the broadest movement. What I saw in the Philippines in terms of the relationship between faith and justice in the Philippines really changed my understanding of what faith has to bring to the movement. The church had a unique role to play, and we did play it. The church encourages people to risk and sacrifice and to continue to have hope, even when things look hopeless. So how do we have that long view? That long view is really a believer's view. And right now, of course, it's so tragic to me that there's a Marcos in the presidency. It's just so tragic. Like, what did all these people die for? I think that people need to think about that a little bit, right? Martial law is about taking away democracy. That's really what it's about. It's about giving people in power the opportunity to act with impunity, to kill others without any process. The alternative to martial law is the dream of democracy. Just a fuller democracy maybe than has ever happened. A democracy that touches all aspects of our lives and not just some aspects. But that's a biblical vision of power sharing. And that it makes sense that as the church in particular, we need to hold that up and to help people to believe in that vision of a better community. I would say this to young activists: don't lose your joy. One of the things that I so loved in the Philippines, I just loved it, was the humor of the people, which was rooted in the collective spirit. You have a particular cultural capacity for joy. Don't lose it in the face of all the anger, because you got to sustain this. And that is very connected to your faith. Don't lose your faith.